Welcome to the Power Platform Show. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/246. I highly recommend you check them out because today's guest has provided a range of links to help you, or resources to help you that you might find applicable to today's topic. Before we chat, however, with today's guest, here's a quick message from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by ISV Connected. ISV Connected is a forum where Microsoft Business Application ISVs can connect, share, and benchmark themselves with other ISVs worldwide. After all, navigating the Microsoft ISV landscape is easier with friends. Sign up today at isvconnected.com. Well, today's guest is from California, USA. She's a merger and acquisition coach and business consultant. She has authored the book Getting Acquired for Millions. She's founded multiple, both financial and IT companies. You can find her on Twitter at Linda Rose and her website rosebizinc.com. Linda Rose, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. So good to talk to you.
It's good to have you on air. I think it's coming up a year since I actually met you, right, in person where were we? We were in Orlando, was it?
Yeah, somewhere. Directions maybe, right?
It was definitely it was at User Group Summit. It was at, what was it called?
Dynamics Communities? The
That's
user
it.
group?
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, DCI in
Seems
Orlando
like such a long
last year.
time ago.
Yeah. So tell me, before we get underway, just I love the listeners to get to know our guests that we have on the show. And so tell me a little bit about family, food, and fun. What do those things mean to you?
Well, family, food, and fun. So I've been married for 30 years. I have a 30-year-old son, just have one. And, we pretty much stay most of the time here in San Diego, but we like to head up to Oregon as well, which is, kind of north, and it's pretty and green. San Diego is dry. It's a desert here, which we like that too. But we get around. My favorite things to do, probably because I'm very beachy, is, I like to paddleboard. I like to kayak. But I really, really love to garden. So I have probably, 40 different kinds of fruit trees. So between what I can grow here in Southern California, which is citrus and avocado and pomegranate, I have some cherries too, and I have some almonds and things like that. And then up north, I have apples and apricots and cherries. And so I kind of migrate between the two homes. And, the summers are quite busy for me because I actually harvest pretty much everything. This year, I made some homemade hard cider and with my apples. Yep, pretty excited. And I love pomegranate, so I make fresh pomegranate juice and, store liters of that in the freezer. So, yeah, I spend a lot of time in the garden.
Wow. Just on the side of the cherries, doesn't it need to get quite cold for cherries to actually fruit?
Actually, no, there's different varieties of them. And so our cherries here in Southern California don't require as much chill time. But our cherries, obviously, in Oregon get way more, and they're much better up there. They're bigger, they're juicier. I mean, they're definitely better cherries up there, but they're not so bad down here either. So.
And what about the avocado growth? As in, because, New Zealand's famous for their avocados. We grow a lot here. Do they grow quite large there?
Yes, they do. San Diego is a huge avocado community. I think I have 4 avocado trees here. And I think I have even during the off season, I pretty much have an avocado every morning for breakfast.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Interesting, isn't? Yeah, I mean, avocado and toast is definitely a staple that I'd have here as well for breakfast. So very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about your career. Like, how did you I'm going to drill into it in various amounts of details as we go through the episode here, but what's your kind of elevator pitch when it comes to your career so far and what you're doing now?
Well, I was in the Microsoft channel for 25 years as a partner, and I started 2 partner organizations. And that was kind of a fluke on how that happened because actually I'm an accountant, a CPA by trade, a tax accountant even more so. And so I thought my entire life I would work at a large CPA firm and, do taxes, right? And so you know how life kind of opens up and gives you opportunities. And I met my husband at the firm, and back in the 80s, you weren't allowed to date, let alone get married. And I kind of liked the guy, so I left. And it was probably a good decision because here we are 33 years later. Again, we dated for 3 years and then we've been married for 30. And so it was probably a good decision. And I just sort of truly fell into technology, although I sort of always had an aptitude for it. And then I started a staffing firm along the way as well. So I started actually 4 companies. One of them just kind of had a short duration. It was only planned to be around for a year. And then in 2013, both my parents passed away. And it was kind of a reality check for me in the sense that I'm like, well, I'm not going to live forever. And I want to at least be able to enjoy life a little bit before I get too old, because my parents, that generation kind of worked until 65, 70, and, saved every little bit they could, and then spent their, last, 10, 15 years in retirement. And I just thought, there's got to be more to that. So I ended up slowly but surely selling off my companies. The last one I sold off was my cloud infrastructure business, which I sold in 2017 to a private equity firm. And I totally, Mark, anticipated retiring, and I could not get off of LinkedIn. I just kept, I felt like I was missing out on life. All my friends were in the channel. Everybody was in technology. Everybody was still doing things. And so right after, actually, I sold the company, like 45 days later, I decided to go on this major backpacking trip. So I don't know if you ever watched the movie Wild with Reese Witherspoon. It's a very popular movie.
Yep, I've seen it.
Yep, and a book. And I watched that movie and read the book and said, you know what, I'm going to do that. I like that idea. And so I told my husband, I said, I'm going to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail. Of course, it was April when I sold my company, and I wasn't been able to get on the trail until July. And that's like too late in the season to hike all 2,650 miles, which is, I don't know what that is in kilometers, but it's a lot. And so I said, I'm just going to do 500 miles. And then my husband said, well, you've never backpacked a day in your life. Do you think you might want to do like a small hike first and see if you like it? And I'm like, you know what? That's not a bad idea. So I was up in Oregon, and I have a big mountain behind me called Mount Hood. And so I took a 4-day trek around that at about a 5,000 foot elevation, and decided that my tent was too small. My sleeping bag was too light. My stove was too heavy. My backpack was pretty good, and my boots were too small. And so basically I switched all that stuff out. But really a month later, I hiked 500 miles on the trail, where I actually met a gentleman from the Czech Republic, because this is a very international trail. And I started talking to him and told him about selling my business and told him about how I learned so much. And he's like, you know what, Linda, you need to write a book. That's how the book came about. I got off the trail and I'm like, you know what, I probably should do that. I've learned so much from selling 3 companies. I know there are a lot of owners of technology firms that are probably, my age. I know they're my age because I'd see them at the conferences, right? We're sitting there, we see the ages of people in the room. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm pretty sure there's a lot of other people that are thinking about retiring at some point in time or moving on to something else. Maybe you're not going to retire. And so that's when I decided to write the book. And then, of course, the book is all about selling your company, which then, boom, led me into my maybe third and last career as an M&A advisor. And I've completed 5 transactions since I first started that a year ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is where you've helped companies go through either the merger acquisition process.
Correct. Yep, exactly. Getting them ready, then taking them through the process, helping them negotiate the offer, obviously finding multiple buyers for them. And it's quite an effort. I really enjoy it. I've been in their role. I've been in their seat. I know what they're thinking. I know, where their fears are, where their concerns are. And so it's almost like a perfect role for me. I take, my accounting background and tax background, plus being a CEO. Plus, I did a lot of legal documents because I had an infrastructure practice and we had like a 12-page legal document. So I felt very comfortable with the legal aspect of it. And it just marries really nicely. And I just love then continuing to maintain my relationships with all these partners in the channel to just now know me in a different light.
So let's talk about those businesses that you created, and really what were the key things you did to position them to be acquired?
I really only positioned the last one, Mark. I just didn't know enough to position the first 2. And so the first company that I sold was in 2008, which was a staffing firm that I started on a whim. And by the way, every single company I've ever started has been truly on a whim. It's like, it's not like this long drawn out plan thing. It's like I wake up one morning, the first company is like, okay, I'm pregnant. I can't get a job anymore. I'm already showing, I'm going to deliver in 4 months and then I want 4 months off. I better start doing my own thing. And that's how the first company started. And then the second company, which was my staffing firm, that came out of the request of my client base, because I was working with a lot of biotech companies who wanted us to come in and provide a completely turnkey solution. Come in, implement our accounting system. And oh, by the way, can you run our accounting department for a period of time? And so I started a staffing firm, to do that. And then the third company, which was my cloud infrastructure business, which was really hosting ERP, CRM systems, Exchange, all that in the cloud before there was Azure, before there was Amazon. So we were in private data centers. That also came out of the request of a client. It was a golf company here in Carlsbad that wanted to use their back room that was housing servers for golf clubs. And he said, you know what? I need you to get those servers out of there, Linda. Put them in a data center for me. And I'm like, great, I'll find somebody that can do that for you. He wasn't happy with that decision. And he's like, I'll just pay for the servers. You go do it. And that's how the cloud infrastructure business started. So everything really was just listening to my client base, finding out what it is that they needed. And then the accountant in me always, people go, well, didn't you find any of that kind of being risky, starting all these companies? To me, I speak in terms of numbers, right? And so if the numbers to me don't lie, right? If I can work through the numbers and they make sense, then I'll start the company. That was my motto.
So did you go through that financial rigor at the start of those businesses and go, okay, what is the number of clients I need? How am I going to reach those clients? All those kind of the building blocks of any business. What was the degree of planning? Because, you're saying you pretty much started on a whim, but it sounds to me like there was a bit of calculations that were done there.
Honestly, Mark, the first company was all about putting food on the table and buying furniture for my house, right? It was just about making a living. No business plan, no nothing. The second company, which was a staffing firm, not quite the same way, but there it was like I saw an opportunity and I didn't see a downside to it. I had some people that could help me with that. So that's how number 2 got started. The third company, which was the cloud infrastructure practice, that I actually wrote out a business plan. And I projected out, what the service would cost and how long I would keep them and what I would charge. And so that was probably the most meticulous. And that was probably the most risky one as well, because this is back in really 2000 when I started that. And, internet wasn't as ubiquitous and the connectivity wasn't as good as it is today. But I just felt like that's where it was headed. I think I was there a little bit before my time. And it wasn't really until 2009 and 2010 where we had this huge recession here in the United States where that proved to be a good move. And I was in the right place at the right time, had all the infrastructure in place. And that's when people said, you know what? We don't want to pay for software anymore. We don't want to buy it. We don't want to buy servers. Let's rent everything. And all of a sudden, my phone started ringing. So it's the right place at the right time.
Yeah. So, in the Microsoft business application world that I've been involved in for many years, we've seen a lot of acquisitions. So particularly big companies like your DXC, even, the top 4 consulting crowds like KPMG and PwC, Deloitte, EY, that type of thing. And they've gone along and they've acquired a bunch of small, medium-sized Microsoft partners in this space. And we've seen a massive consolidation happen over probably the last 2 to 3 years. But what I've noticed recently is a lot of consultants that have been consultants, maybe even for these big companies, are going, you know what? I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to go out on my own and I'm going to do this myself. And they're growing 6, 7 staff on board and they continue to grow. But, some of the things they're thinking about is that, how do I exit? Even though they're just starting, you're often taught that you should always be considering how long are you doing this for and what's your exit strategy. What advice do you have for those kind of, new startup type businesses that are building practices? They've hitched their cart to Microsoft business applications in this case. What's your advice to them?
Well, it certainly is different than it would have been, 10 years ago, but now it's all about recurring revenue and whatever you can do to sell a cloud solution, tack on some intellectual property, with that comes a value add. You don't even have to tie a customer up for 3 years in a contract. Those days are over too. I mean, you can just really do a 1-year contract with an evergreen. If I had to do it all over again, and people have asked me this question, said, Lynn, if you were to do it all over again and start from scratch, how would you do this? And, for me, it would be everything as a service, and not only for my customers, but everybody else's. And so I would put everything on video. I would record everything. I would have a monthly membership. I said, you can buy the software from me. And for this monthly membership, you get the entire video library from now until eternity, all new videos coming out all the time on how you're going to use your application. And yes, we can implement your application for, a certain monthly fee that will run for the next 12 months, but everything would be on a fixed monthly fee. I would never want to ever wake up on the first of any month and try to figure out where my revenue is coming from. And that was the case in my last cloud infrastructure business. We were 98% recurring revenue with a 95% customer retention rate. And buyers looked at that and said, this is fabulous, which is also why I could walk out the door 45 days later. 100% cash offer. Boom, done.
So, if a company was, or an individual, an owner of a business was considering selling, I know that in your book, there's the 8 key valuation maximizers that you talk about. Can you kind of unpack those a little bit and the level of importance that an owner would need to place around them?
Yeah. So, the first one, it's not super sexy, the first one, but it really is about getting your financials in order, because it doesn't matter the size organization that I represent. I've represented as small as $1 million and as large as $80 million. And it doesn't matter the size. The $80 million company was just coming off of QuickBooks, by the way. Getting your financials in what we call here generally accepted accounting principles. You have a variation of that in New Zealand as well. But, getting them in accordance with that, where your revenue and your expenses are matched in the same month, that's hurdle number one. I think the second thing, as we talked about, recurring revenue, but then the third thing is, after some point, you have to stop being the rainmaker as the owner, right? You have to build that management team, surround yourself with really bright people, give them some part of the company if it makes sense. I certainly did that. And, and don't be afraid to surround yourself with people who are brighter than you. And that was really, a lesson. It took me a long time to learn that, but a very, very valuable one. And then, really monitoring your customer base. Everybody says, oh yeah, I do customer satisfaction and I know my customers are happy. And I'll go, okay, well, when's the last time you did customer sat? Well, we did the CSAT last time we had to renew our gold Microsoft partner. And, that's really not enough. You constantly have to be in front of that customer and making sure that they're happy, reducing that churn rate, so increasing the recurring revenue, reducing the churn rate. Those are just all key things. And then until you get to I would say 3, 4, 5 million, at that point, you have to really eliminate any single points of failure. And typically that could be a person, right? So for a very long time, especially when you're below 3 million, there's one person that's kind of key to your company besides you, right? Maybe the lead engineer or maybe your sales guy. And if he left, you'd be up, without a paddle. And so you really have to start eliminating those single points of failure, as well as not having any particular customer represent more than 10% of your revenue. I've seen that happen too, where larger companies, they've got one customer, it's 20% of their revenue, and a buyer gets very uncomfortable with that, right? Yeah. So just really spreading out that love. I mean, you'd love to pull in the big fish, right? Those big deals. And there's I love that too. But then there were the days where you know what, give me the small stuff. I'm taking the small stuff because it's going to even out the big stuff as well over time. And so that you're not relying on one particular customer. And if they left, again, you'd be up the creek without a paddle.
What about things like drawings? Often a business owner will not really factor in their cost to the business, as in because they, particularly if they're kind of bootstrapping their operations, they might not be really valuing themselves. In other words, paying themselves a salary, income, anything like that. Mm-hmm. Have you come across that? And how do you rectify that in the customers that you're coaching, for acquisition?
Yes. So very common, and I'm expecting with your tax laws as well, is that you get the type of entity where you can do distributions, right, from the extra cash that you've earned. Yep. And you can avoid some taxes by doing it. And, the good tax accountant in me says, absolutely go for it. But when you prepare your company to sell, let's say, for example, that you're really only taking an $80,000 salary and then you're supplementing your income with another, $80,000 in a draw. So you're really paying yourself $160,000 a year, right? So when you prepare your financials and you do your adjustments to EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, you're going to have to do an add back or subtract in this case for the additional salary that you would have paid yourself that's not a distribution, right? So, because here's what happens. And if you undercut that, the buyer's going to say, well, wait a second, between your distribution and your salary, you're only paying yourself $120,000 a year. Why all of a sudden do you want 160? I've never seen you, pay yourself that much. Well, I prepare my people and say, look, you might want to start drawing a higher salary, or we're going to have to show in the EBITDA adjustments that you're paying yourself more, because when you go to work for this company, which most people have to for a period of time during an earnout, you want to get paid the salary that you want to earn, right? And so most owners go, oh gosh, I didn't even think about that, right? But it is something that we have to evaluate and look at during this process.
Yeah. So from kind of an individual, an owner, looking at going into that selling motion, what are you seeing from the time frame from having that idea and going, you know what, I think it's time to sell. I'm going to sell this year. Does anything happen that quickly? In the market we're in now, it might have happened in the past, but in the market we're in now, what's the type of time frame to, if you like, get your house in order, get ready for selling the company? What's typical time frames you're seeing and what's involved?
The more prepared you can be, the higher the value you'll get for your company. And I think most people, if they really understood the process and what buyers are looking for, would probably recognize it will take them anywhere from 2 to 3 years to get their company ready. And then there are some people, even myself, having that 98% recurring revenue and a low customer churn, it still took me 3 years to get all the right people on the bus in the right seats, to get my sales guy humming away, because for the longest time I was doing sales. And so, putting all that in place and showing a track record that those people can do that job takes time. You can't do that overnight. But let's say you have all that in place. From the time that you decide that you're going to sell, which typically means, finding your top 3, as in your broker, your attorney, and your CPA, and then going through the process of going to market, selecting the right buyer, negotiating the LOI, then moving into contracts, it's anywhere from an 8 to 9 month process. So, somebody comes to me and says, hey, Linda, I want to sell here in 2020. I'm doing really, really well. I'm going to say, that's great. We can begin the process, but the deal is not going to finish until 2021. But people really don't understand how much they can affect the sales price of their company if they do certain things. And so that's obviously why I wrote the book. But it also is what is prompting me to write a course. So one of the things I'm doing, Mark, when I'm not in the middle of a deal, is I'm preparing a course that I'm hoping to deliver the first quarter of next year, which would take people through over a 6-week period, all the important things that they need to do to prepare for a sale. And the course will let them know, what their current value is today, how long it will take them to get to the value that they want, who their ideal buyer is. Other people don't realize there are multiple different types of buyers. You have your strategic buyers, you have your private equity firms, you have your family offices. Each of them look for different things. Each of them are going to remunerate you differently, so the terms will be different. And you may not be a good fit for a strategic, or you may not be a good fit for a private equity firm. And so knowing that and going in allows you to position your company to that particular buyer, or multiple types of buyers, right? In my case, I knew that I wanted to appeal to a private equity firm. I didn't want to get bought by another partner. I thought that a private equity firm would potentially give me a better offer. And so, everybody's different. And so knowing all that, going in and preparing yourself can make a huge difference.
In the business application space, in your experience, are you seeing really private equity get involved in that, or are you seeing more larger partners acquiring smaller partners?
With COVID, things have changed so much. I mean, private equity was really getting into the game the last 2 years, especially with Microsoft partners, because, being a Microsoft partner right now is kind of a hot thing because you could do so many things as a Microsoft partner. You can sell Power BI, you can sell ERP, you can sell CRM, you can sell Office 365 or Microsoft 65, whatever we call it these days, right?
Yeah.
There's so many other things you can do. And one firm can't do it all. So what happens is a private equity firm sees this as an opportunity and says, okay, let me buy ERP CRM firm and add it to an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 firm and attach a Power BI firm, include all that together, take those customers from each one of those small add-ins that I've done, upsell, cross sell to that customer base, and you have a mega firm now that's generating a ton of revenue and gotten economies of scale as part of that. And private equity looks at this and says, this is an amazing opportunity. And so this is pre-COVID. You had private equity jumping in. Now let's talk COVID. And I did a survey to validate this as well. And I just actually released a blog on this today. And that is for the first 6 months of this year, private equity is way outdoing strategics in terms of making acquisitions. Because guess what? They actually haven't stopped. It's the strategic buyers, it's the partners buying partners that has gone on a big halt, because those partners that are buying other partners are going, okay, well, wait a second. We don't know how long COVID's going to last. We need to conserve our cash. So, the price of a loan has gone up a point or two because of just the risk, right? And depending upon what industry you're in as well. And so strategics have kind of backed off a little bit. And private equity saying, no, we have $1.7 trillion of dry powder that we need to still spend. And so they're buying. They are out there buying. And so I think I saw a statistic that 65% of the deals that were done in the second quarter of this year during COVID were private equity. And I don't think, Mark, that's going to change for the rest of this year and maybe into early 2021. I think strategic buyers are still going to sit on the sidelines for a period of time because, even if you got a PPP loan, which, you can here in the US, at some point you either have to give that money back or it may get forgiven. And given that none of us know when a vaccine is going to come out, we don't know how long this is going to last. And the smart CEO is conserving cash.
Yeah. So true. If we look again at a startup partner practice, with Microsoft, what is the key thing that you see will build a successful company as opposed to not? And why? It might be a couple of key things, but what I'm kind of playing towards here, for me, it's always been sales. If you don't have your sales engine right, I find partners can often get their delivery engine right, but the sales engine, not so much. What have you seen in the market, in your experience with the companies that you've worked with, that have really executed correctly from a sales motion perspective?
It's interesting. Well, first of all, I think marketing is way more important than sales.
Interesting.
Today.
Yep.
And that's, I think, over the last 2-3 years. As you get away from doing sort of a time and material, let me quote the implementation to do this. That's what sales was. You need sales to do that, right? Get in there, understand it, whatever. Once you move to what I call a package solution, where there is no more time and materials, there is no more high-low bid. It's just, this is what it is. You can pick all the different elements that you want to buy, but it's a fixed fee and you can pay for it all in 1 month or over a period of time or whatever, but it's a package solution. You have package A, package B, package C, and depending upon how much, hand-holding you want, you pick your package, right? And so now it's salespeople, honestly, they just need to make sure the right package got picked. It's marketing where the key is. And as we all have heard, everybody's out trying to find their solutions in advance of talking to any salesperson, whether that's a house, a car, or a solution. Everybody's shopping on their own. And that's where I think the power of video and having that in its place, instead of, waiting for the salesperson to call you back, you go out and you consume all the videos that you want to learn about the solution that you're interested in. And then you just call up and you place the order. I mean, everything should be done via video and everything should be done via a package solution. And the people that have embraced that and embraced it earlier are the ones that are doing the best, because the margins on package solutions typically are higher.
And so I take it those package solutions then would be industry tailored as well?
Yes.
How important is it to target industry in the partner ecosystem than to be, in my career, and I started in 2003 in this space, and when we would do projects, it would be, if you've got money and you need our services, we'd take the work. And we did very well, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, in that model. But I believe that, Microsoft's encouraged for the verticalization for years now, but I still see a lot of partners will still take any deal that comes their way, whether they've got the industry IP or not.
That's so true. Yeah. And I think especially during this time period as well, you hear a lot less people talking about industry specialties right now, because maybe you're in one of those industries that's not doing super well, right? So People have laid off the whole industry focus, but it is important. But here's the other thing too. I kind of joke and say I was probably the most horizontal partner that you probably ever met. Although I did ended up having a vertical focus, but again, it was because of my horizontal solution. And let me explain that. From a cloud infrastructure standpoint, well, first of all, the biggest, baddest word to me in the vocabulary is the word commoditization. I never want to be a commodity. And the second I became a commodity is when I moved on, right? So you do everything to not become commoditized. And so even as a cloud infrastructure person, people were coming in and saying, even Microsoft, there was one guy at Microsoft that said, Linda, I don't see how it is you can continue to charge $300 per user per month when, we're going to come out with a solution that's like, 70. And I said, yeah, well, here's why. Because my solution is geared towards people who are highly regulated. So even though I was very horizontal and serviced multiple different industries, I provided a layer on top that provided a layer of security for highly regulated companies where they were, FDA or publicly traded or whatever the case may have been. And my competition couldn't provide that extra layer of security. And because I could, and because my particular clientele needed it, they were totally willing to pay more, right? Yeah. So my margins were higher. Now, again, did I pick a vertical? No. But what ended up happening by going that route is I found myself with a number of life science, healthcare companies that, needed that extra level of certification. I found myself with publicly traded companies. So I did find myself in a couple of industries, biotech, healthcare, financial services, kind of gravitated to me because of that extra layer of compliance that I put on top of it. Did I ever plan to go after an industry? And trust me, I was in all those Microsoft meetings where it's like, pick an industry. And I'm like, you know what? I don't really have a specialty here. I have no IP, right? And what I'm trying to say here is you could be specialized without being in a particular industry. You just need to sit back and think about that. And really for me, it was sitting back and examining my customer base and going, okay, where are these people coming from? Why are they coming to me? And it became obvious. Sometimes a cocktail helps that process work a little bit better. But I think, whatever you are, whatever you do, whatever your company is, I think if you sit back and you really look at the kind of opportunities that are coming to you, it'll come to you. How you're going to differentiate yourself. And again, it may not be within a particular industry.
Yeah. You mentioned IP there. What's the importance of that from the perception of a Microsoft practice? What part does IP that's, totally unique to that practice important?
Right. So there's different kinds of IP and people don't really understand that. There's what I call organizational IP, and that's how you run your business. That may be how you do your quotes. That may be how you deploy something on Azure. That may be how, fill in the blank. And then there's IP that's actually, you did some coding, right? So the coding kind of IP lends itself towards, moving in the direction of becoming an ISV or providing a solution that nobody else has out there. And that truly is the best kind of IP. But what I call organizational IP, where, you've got your processes and procedures, where you tack on some solutions and you've knitted together a few things, that's IP as well. And, if you can find a great solution, I didn't invent this, a gentleman named Dana Wilmer did with CloudSpeed, but he talks about this IP staircase, which I talk about in my book because it so exemplifies how you can take some Microsoft solutions, knit them together, and have a solution. And I'll give you a good example. There's a company, a Microsoft partner called, I think they're called Cannabis 365 365 for cannabis. I'm botching that, right? But it's basically, they've taken Nav, they've taken Office 365, they've taken Ellis Retail, they've taken a few other ISVs, they've stitched them all together, they've renamed a bunch of different fields, and little coding in here, there, and now they've come out with a completely vertical solution that a cannabis company would take, that's growing cannabis and selling at retail. They do from a seed to sale solution. All of it stitched across Microsoft solutions and Microsoft ISVs. They've just tweaked it for one particular industry. Is there a ton of their own IP in there? Not a ton. I mean, yes, they've written some to stitch together the products, right? But, is it a room full of developers that are coding, all day long? Probably not. So my point is you can do that. And that, obviously they're very vertical. They don't do anything but cannabis. And, other partners have gone out there and done that as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, that I like that differentiation, that separation between organizational IP and code, which I think, once again, being in the industry, I feel that IP is often considered only as the code that you have rather than really how you do so much of what you do.
Correct.
Tell me about writing books, writing this book, and what's been that journey for you? What has been the outcome? What have been the lessons that you've learned from writing this book?
Mark, writing a book is not for the faint-hearted. I listen to so many podcasts where people says, "Oh, you can get a book out in X amount of days," and I'm like, you know what? I don't want to write a fluff piece. I want to write a piece that is helpful for CEOs. I mean, I knew exactly who I wanted to write the book for. I wanted to write a book for every technology service provider that's spent years running a company and is now thinking about selling. It is not for the masses, right? Although I've had other people call me up and say, "I'm not in technology and I read your book and I got so much out of it," which is great. But I knew there was so much that I wanted to share. I am actually not a writer. I never consider myself a great writer. I would write technical blog posts and I could put together legal paragraphs because I felt comfortable with that. And again, remember, I think in terms of numbers. I'm an accountant. I'm a tax accountant. That's where my sweet spot is. But, I started slow. It took probably a lot longer than it would have taken anybody else to get my first draft out, which was probably around 6 or 7 months. And then I put the whole thing down for 3 months and said, you know what? I don't want to see it, think about it. I'm tired of it. I'm sick and tired of it. And I took a 3-month hiatus and then I came back to it and I reread what I wrote. And some of it, I'm like, wow, some of this is really good. And then I said, some of it's shit and I have to redo it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there were some chapters that I rewrote 2-3 times because I just didn't feel like I really hit home on it. But I got to say, and my goal was to get maybe, 60, 70,000 words. And then somewhere in the 90,000 words, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is turning into a large book. And I don't know, ended up being like 100,000 words when it was all said and done. But honestly, Mark, I don't feel like any part of this book is fluff, right? Like I'm a CEO. I don't have time. I still consider myself CEO. I don't have time for fluff. I got to get to the meat of it, right? Give me the golden nuggets. Give me the pieces that I need to know now. And let's get there quickly. But with examples to show you in real life how this works, right? I didn't want some pie in the sky M&A book for publicly traded companies that have manufacturing and inventory. That's not who we are. And there's no book that was written for what we do. And I wanted to be the person to put that out. Now, did I take a mimosa in the morning sometimes to get me started? You bet, because it took that other side of the brain to get going and get out of the numbers and the analytical side and get into more of the story and how do we present this in a manner that people will enjoy. And so, yeah, it probably took me a lot longer, like 18 months from start to finish, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And then, of course, after talking to you and one of your colleagues, I decided to put it out on Audible, which was a great decision as well.
Yeah, so good, so good. Who's the target audience? Who should, if they're listening to this, who should be reading your book?
I think anybody that's over $1 million in revenue that is a technology service provider, and I don't care what channel you're in, you don't have to be the Microsoft channel, it could be for any kind of channel partner, but somebody that sells somebody else's software or solution and then tacks on their own services, right? That's who this book is meant for. Because now, an ISV or custom developer, that is maybe not selling somebody else's software could get a lot out of this book too. And there are parts of the book that are specifically for them. So, it's really a technology service provider, I think is, and that's who I wrote it for. And that's where all the examples are for.
It's great. It's great. Now, you say you're releasing a course which will help a lot. Some people, that might not be enough and they actually need someone to help coach, lead them through this process. Are you helping companies? Is that what
Yes.
you're doing nowadays, as in taking companies going through and are you the broker or what's your role that you'd typically play?
I'm the broker, if you want to call it that. Yep. I call it more of an M&A advisor because I'm not SEC authorized. And so there's certain things I can't do, but the transactions of this size, it's not an issue for me. And I really coach people from how their financial statements should be prepared in terms of format. I don't audit anybody's financials, but many companies don't really understand what buyers are looking for. And I coach them on rejigging how their financials should look so that we have sales and marketing, we have a number there, and that our cost of goods sold is properly stated because a lot of people don't put in cost of goods sold, what should be there. A lot of it's below the line, and that can come back and bite you later on down the road in due diligence. And so I really prepare people for that due diligence process and make it as easy as possible for the buyers to consume the data, right? And because I understand this partner ecosystem, I really get into what that specific partner's value proposition is and how to best pitch that and who would be the best buyer. And then of course, at the end of the day, it's all around culture. And I have a really good sense for matching up cultures, right? I get to know the buyers really well. I obviously get to know my sellers, but then I get to know the buyers too. And I get a sense for, their organization and their culture, because at the end of the day, the two organizations have to work together. And especially if you have an earnout as part of this, and most 90% of the deals do, you got to make sure the teams mesh well and can, work together well. And so culture is huge. And I would never suggest that somebody does a deal just because of money and, with the cultures not meshing. And, sometimes it does come down to picking the better culture, and maybe it's not the highest price, but in the end, that's what's right for the seller and that's what's right for their team. And everybody wants to do right by their team because it's their team that got them to that point today where they're able to sell.
Yeah. Wow, Linda, it's a topic we could talk about for hours, but it's time to wrap things up. And I always like to finish a show with some quick fire questions. So are you ready for your quick fire questions?
Okay.
Okay, they're random. Okay. What show on Netflix or series on Netflix have you watched or listened to recently that you'd recommend?
Well, something about like CIA kind of stuff and drug lords and all that. So I'm totally into the whole Narcos.
Nice. It was a good series.
Into that whole thing. I don't know, I'm just fascinated by that whole thing. I love the whole CIA, there was a show called The Americans. It's quite old actually, and I found it where it was a husband and wife. They were Soviet spies, but they were living in the US. It was so much fun. I kind of get off on that kind of stuff. So, yep, that's what I've been watching lately.
Nice. If you were to compete in the Olympics, what sport would it be?
Oh, gymnastics for sure. I was a gymnast for many, many years.
Wow.
Absolutely loved gymnastics. I just got too tall for the sport. The center of gravity, there's just nothing you can do. There are no tall gymnasts.
Yeah. What mistake do people often make about you?
Oh, I think, this is funny, and I talk about this a little bit in the book. I'm pretty intense to the outside world, right? People go, wow, she's intense. I can be intimidating to the outside world. But people that have come to work for me stay with me for a very long time, and they get to know the other side of me. I'm very generous. I'm very caring. I had things in our organization where people would get sabbaticals in addition to their vacation. I took my entire office to Costa Rica, to Tahiti, on cruises as rewards and experiences, because I didn't want people just to work for me and not have an experience at the end of the day. And there's so many people that have actually, obviously came and went over the 20 years, but I've maintained relationships with those people. And when we get back together and we see each other, we talk about, oh my God, you remember the time when we were here and did that? To me, it was about an experience. And I really got those values from the Great Plains team back in Fargo. I thought that their leadership was exemplary. And I took a lot of those values as a leader to heart and tried to implement them in my companies over the years. And probably one of the most things I'm proud of.
Nice.
And people just don't know that about me. People think I'm just pretty intense.
I love it. Would you rather save money or time?
Oh, time.
Yeah. What was your first car?
I drove a Maverick.
A Maverick? What's
yeah.
I've never heard
Ford
of it.
Maverick? They don't make those anymore.
Linda, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Is there anyone you'd recommend as a guest for a future show?
Oh, wow. Oh, you caught me on that one. There's so many great people out there. Could I narrow it to one? I'm very much about the psychology of selling and the psychology around marketing. And, the guy that I'm following that I think would be great if you could get him is a guy named Donald Miller, who wrote the book Story Brand, which I think is a must read for anybody that is serious about marketing. There's a video out there, and we can maybe put it in the show notes, and I can give you some other stuff for your show notes, but there's a 12-minute video out there that this guy does on how to organize the front page of your website. And honestly, within 12 minutes, you're like, oh my gosh, I totally get it. I mean, he explains it so well. He's a great marketer, and I think you got to pick up that book.
Awesome. I love it. Thanks again.
All right. Great talking to you. Hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Hey, thanks again for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP, Mark Smith, also known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show, please let me know. Just send me a message via LinkedIn. I'd love it if you love the show that you would subscribe, review it in your favorite podcast app. That would be fantastic. Otherwise, see you next time.